براحتك.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, guys. How are you? I hope that all of you are okay. I would like to welcome you today again in our the second part from our webinar. And I would like to welcome our guest, Wayne Bully. And I would like also to thank him very much for giving us his time for the second time, for the second part tonight. We would like to continue today what we finished last webinar, last Friday. Today we will, as we agreed before, we will make it as a panel of discussion and replying the questions. And also in the beginning, before beginning, I would like to welcome my big brother, Mr. Mohamed Benhamida, and my daughter, Ghizlan. And also I would like to welcome the two African instructors in beach volleyball, Fred and Munir, and all the instructors and attendees. Okay, thank you. The floor for you, Mohamed.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to congratulate deeply and warmly Sherif Elshemerly, not because he's my brother, but because of the wedding of his son 2 days ago. So congratulations.
Thank you, Mohamed.
Hope for them.
Ghizlan.
Inshallah.
We are waiting for Ghizlan and Rasim, okay?
Inshallah. Inshallah. So as Sherif said, that we will continue our feedback or experience feedback. And one of the experiences we had was with Wayne last week, the measurement of performance of, or we can call it also evaluation, whatever you can call it. So the process of today will be like that. We collected, since Sunday, we collected questions from the whole coaches we had via email. So it was just scaled. Then some of them had 2 questions, some of them 8, etc., etc. So what will happen? Freddie will ask in English, then Ghizlan will translate. Then after that, Wayne will interfere. He will answer the questions. Then Ghizlan will translate. And then Fred will jump to the second question. So the deal will be 2 questions per person. So they will announce the name and the nationality of the questionnaire, the people who asked, plus the question. Then if we will have time, we will extend the questions, the remaining questions. We have around 50 or 55 questions. So thanks a lot, Wayne. Thanks, Sherif, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Fred.
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Sherif. Thank you very much, Mr. Benhamida, and our coach, Mr. Wayne. Welcome to the webinar, and straight away we're going to conduct as instructed by Benhamida. Please, I will go straight to the first question from Halima Bakari from Kenya. Halima, she's asking, is there a specific method you can recommend for monitoring performance for a developing team? Please, Ghizlan, can you translate?
Existe-t-il une méthode particulière pour surveiller la performance d'une équipe en développement? Back to you, Wayne.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you
okay.
very much.
Yeah, there's lots of way to do it, as I understand. We do a lot of videotaping and then watching the videotape afterwards. That's how we are able to get data to monitor performance. We also do a little bit of live in training practice data collection. Sometimes if you have other coaches, they can be can assign a coach to look at a particular aspect of the game, whether it's kills or service reception or serving. And if you're fortunate enough to have a staff, you could ask that staff person to track those things live. So, and then just keeping a log, like I said, we use Excel, and just kind of keeping whatever stats you keep on a daily or weekly basis, just keeping them in a database and comparing them from week to week or day to day. Those are the primary methods by which I think that I would recommend monitoring players' performances, measuring it and writing it down and logging it and comparing it week to week and month to month.
Thank you very much. Gisline?
Donc, il y a plusieurs façons de le faire. Notamment, on peut filmer des matchs, des entraînements et les regarder après. On peut faire en sorte de mesurer ses performances pendant l'entraînement. D'autres entraîneurs peuvent venir assister à nos matchs et à nos entraînements et justement mesurer ces données de leur propre point de vue. Et enfin, il faudrait garder une base de données sur Excel et la comparer quotidiennement, mensuellement et de façon hebdomadaire.
Thank you, Gisline. We jump to second question from Halima Bakari of Kenya. How can a coach for a developing team prioritize skills to be analyzed given that most of the players are getting into specialization phase? Gisline?
Comment est-ce que le coach d'une équipe en développement peut prioriser les techniques à développer, sachant que la plupart des joueurs sont encore dans la phase de spécialisation? Back to you, Wayne.
Well, how we prioritized skills was just a lot of data over time to figuring out what were the skills that were most important to winning. That's what we did. So we found out, for example, that first ball kills were really important to winning. And so that was a top priority. And at our level, we found that blocking wasn't closely correlated with winning. And so we had a low priority in terms of blocking, which isn't to say we thought it was unimportant. We thought all of it was very important. But even a list of important things has a priority from top to bottom. So we were able to use math essentially to determine through correlations and statistics what events were most important to winning. And that's how we determined our priority. A second way to determine priority could be what are the skills that your players are least proficient at. And so the priority could be linked simply to improvement as opposed to winning. And so the skills that each player was least proficient at would become your highest priority under that model. So if it's either winning or improvement is your goal, and then priority was determined in relation to the goal of either winning or the goal of either improving.
Thank you very much, Gisline.
Nous avons fait ça au fur et à mesure en regardant nos joueurs. Par exemple, le bloc n'avait que très peu d'impact sur le fait de gagner un match, donc c'était quelque chose qui descendait en bas de la liste par rapport à nos priorités. On a fait ça par corrélation et en regardant nos statistiques. On s'est aussi posé la question sur quelles sont les techniques pour lesquelles nos joueurs ont des lacunes et comment est-ce que nous pouvons les développer pour gagner les matchs. Dans l'absolu, nous avions deux buts à atteindre, gagner ou devenir meilleur. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Gisline. Now we jump to another question from Dibo Libala of Botswana. He's asking, what is the role of the athlete in performance measurement? Gisline?
Quel est le rôle de l'athlète dans l'évaluation de la performance?
The role of the athlete can be varied. One role the athlete has is to receive the information, for example. So if coach is measuring, one of the athlete's role is to meet with coach and learn from the coach and from the data the areas in which the athlete is most and least proficient. So when the athlete is training, the athlete is aware of the skills that she or he is working on to improve. So that's the first role of the athlete. The second role of the athlete really is to be mindful toward improvement and to understand that if improvement, excuse me, requires change, a big role in the athlete is to bring the right mentality to practice and understand that in order to improve, he or she is going to have to change. And that process of change will require a lot of mistakes. It will require a lot of unsuccessful attempts and unsuccessful repetitions. It may be a new technique she's trying to change, or it may be improving her vision. So that process of change will be an uncomfortable one. It will produce mistakes, and it likely will cause her performance to go even lower before it rises again and becomes higher. So the athlete's role in that process is to understand that and bring a mentality that is consistent with a desire to overcome the adversity that can be a product of the change. So learning about her performance, what she's working on, and bringing a strong mindset to the performance, I think is two of the athlete's primary roles in that process.
Thank you very much. Ghislaine?
Le premier est le fait de recevoir l'information. Donc, l'athlète, quand on lui demande d'améliorer une certaine technique, un des premiers jobs est justement d'être conscient qu'il y a une lacune quelque part et qu'il faut la modifier. La deuxième, c'est justement d'être conscient des améliorations qu'il faut apporter et de l'importance du fait de bien les effectuer. Il faut avant tout que l'athlète, quand il arrive, qu'il ait la bonne mentalité, qu'il soit dans la phase d'acceptation, pas forcément de la critique, mais du conseil, et qu'il soit ouvert d'esprit. Back to you.
Thank you very much. We go to the second question of Ndibo Libala of Botswana. One of the difficult times in performance measurement is dealing negative data and sharing it with athletes. How do you do it?
Une crainte quand nous mesurons les performances est le fait de devoir gérer des données négatives, des statistiques négatives, et de les partager donc avec les athlètes. Comment devons-nous procéder? Back to you.
What a wonderful question, and certainly we probably could benefit from a sports psychologist. But negative data is a reality of this process of coaching, and meeting with the players and handling how they receive it is an important part of what we do. Negative could be negative in two ways, again, depending on what your goal is. We talked last time about having objective standards of performance for each skill. So for example, if our standard of performance in reception is to pass the ball in system 60% of the time, and the player is at 40%, certainly that could be negative data. However, one way we might present that negative data to an athlete is to show that she used to be at 30% or he used to be at 25%. So one way that the data is negative insofar as it didn't meet the objective standard of measurement, but it can be positive if we look at in terms of improvement over time. And so that is one of the ways in which we've dealt with negative data. Another way is simply, look, sometimes the data shows that the athlete hasn't met the objective standard and hasn't improved, and that's a tough situation to deal with. And certainly helping the athlete to understand that with growth and with change comes usually a negative performance, showing her that she's going to fall off or get worse before she's going to get better, and helping her to simply buy into the process of buying into the process. So those are a couple of ways in which we've attempted to deal with negative data to keep the athlete motivated.
Thank you very much. Ghislaine?
Donc les données négatives font partie du processus normal de l'amélioration et de l'atteinte des objectifs. On peut les montrer à l'athlète comme un signe d'amélioration. C'est-à-dire que si on considère qu'un 30% est négatif, quand l'athlète fera 35%, on lui montrera qu'à un moment il a fait 30% et que là on est à 35%. Et ça arrive que le joueur ou l'athlète stagne, donc il ne s'améliore plus, il n'avance plus. Et le fait de leur montrer l'avancée de leur performance est un signe de motivation. même si c'est négatif, ça leur montre qu'il y a un mouvement et qu'on est en bonne voie. Parce que dans tous les cas, les joueurs peuvent très souvent empirer de niveau, mais avoir un niveau qui baisse pour ensuite remonter. Et c'est ce qu'on veut. On veut tout le temps que nos athlètes s'améliorent. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Gisle. Now we jump to Islam Okasha of Egypt. Is asking, what's the percentage between blocking and drop at high level for both genders?
I'm sorry, the percentage of blocking and
Drop.
oh, got it.
Quel est le pourcentage de bloc et de drop pour les athlètes de haut niveau et pour les genres différents?
That was fast. The only numbers I know off the top of my head are what we spent most of our time on, which was American collegiate women's volleyball in the United States. And it varies, but our experience with our teams in the southeast part of the country was that we were dropping or pulling almost half the time to more than half the time. So roughly 50-50 blocking and pulling with a slight edge toward pulling. Certainly those numbers, I've read data that indicates that there's a lot more blocking, certainly at the professional level in the United States in the women's game. And certainly there's much more blocking, probably 8 to 90% of the time blocking in the men's game, as opposed to say 10% pulling in the men's game, both in the United States and internationally. So more pulling or more dropping, if you will, in the women's game than the men's game, and more pulling or more blocking as the level of play gets higher. Those are the trends that we found.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Donc, en temps normal, chez les étudiantes de l'université, c'était du 50-50. Nous avons remarqué plus de drops, donc plus de drops chez les femmes professionnelles, chez les athlètes femmes professionnelles américaines que de blocs, contrairement à 80% de blocs chez les hommes et 20% de drops.
Thank you very much. We have another question from Islam Okasha of Egypt. Also, what's the percentage between heavy attack and shots for both genders? Gisle?
Quel est le pourcentage des attaques et des balles pour les deux genres?
Again, I don't have specific numbers off the top of my head on that, so I can share with you what I know to be the trends, which is probably most of our audience is probably aware of the trends. I do have specific numbers. I would just have to look them up and see what they were. More heavy attack than shots in the men's game, and there was some than in the women's game, by the way. And there was also some great research that came out in the last year. And if I'm able to find the title of the research, I'll share it during our discussion today. And the research was centered around whether there is when a player makes an error, whether the next play is likely to be shot or heavy attack, and whether a player gets dug, whether the next play by that player is more likely to be shot or attack. And so that was some really great research. And I believe what they found rather was, and I'll look it up. I believe that in the men's game, a heavy attack was that is dug or that resulted in an error was just as likely to be followed by another heavy attack. Whereas in the women's game, a heavy attack that resulted in a dig or an error was more likely to be followed by a shot. I believe that's what the summary of the research was, but I'm going to work and try to find that research study while we're chatting and share that with everybody.
Thank you very much. Gisle?
Donc, je n'ai pas les nombres spécifiques, mais dans tous les cas, il y a des tendances. Donc, il y a beaucoup plus d'attaques chez les hommes. Il y a une recherche qui a été effectuée il y a quelques temps et qui comparait donc quand à un moment il y a une faute, est-ce que la balle est récupérée en attaque ou en manchette? Et on voyait qu'il y avait plus de chances que ça soit le cas chez les hommes que chez les femmes.
Oh, thank you very much. We jump to Sam Mulinge from Kenya. He's asking, with your experience, how many repetition samples would you advocate for a player to get the right matrix percentage or rather good efficiency during training on elite athletes, especially under the greatest pressure? And does it apply to both gender?
I didn't quite hear the second part of that question.
All right, I can say it again. With your experience, how many repetitions samples would you advocate for a player to get the right matrix percentage or rather good efficiency during training on elite athletes, especially under the greatest pressure? And does it apply to both gender? Ghislaine?
Yes. Combien d'échantillons de répétition devrions-nous allouer à un joueur pour avoir la matrice de pourcentage exacte? En est-il de la même manière pour les deux genres?
What we found was the trend, I guess, again, is what you might expect is that the more repetition samples we got, the more accurate were the conclusions. We were looking definitely at a trend of no less than 500 repetitions in serve, receive, and attack. So we used 500 as sort of a baseline performance for us. And what we ended up getting, of course, was significantly more than that. We ended the season with thousands and tens of thousands of repetitions. But once we got 500, we felt pretty confident about drawing conclusions from the amount of that data. And it's such a great question, because what happens when we have an inadequate number of repetitions or data points is that factors like randomness in the game, factors like wind direction, whether the player was on the good or bad side, factors, sun, things like that really impacted the number of the results of our data if we had a small number, say 100 or 200 or even 50 repetitions. So it was really important for us to make sure that we were able to get enough repetitions of at least 500 or more up into several thousands to make sure that we were able to kind of allow the law of large numbers, if you will, to weed out and things like randomness and things like sun, things like wind.
Thank you, Ghislaine.
Donc on va encore une fois parler de tendance. Plus on avait de répétitions, plus nous pouvions nous permettre de tirer des conclusions. Nous nous étions fixés un nombre de 500 répétitions. Finalement, on en a eu plus de 10 000. Et à partir de ce moment, on s'est rendu compte qu'on pouvait aussi étudier ou faire en sorte de voir aussi ou d'avoir une meilleure conception ou une meilleure idée de tout ce qui est aléatoire, la direction du vent, la position du joueur, la position du soleil, etc.
Thank you for translation. We jump into second question of Sam Mulinge of Kenya. In elite players, service is one of the main skill, which is likely to influence the efficiency of reception due to speed and other sophisticated methods. With factors related to wind, sun, etc., should we take more time practicing out of system rather than in system? Isle?
Chez les joueurs professionnels, devrions-nous passer plus de temps à s'entraîner en out of system ou en in system?
Another excellent question that goes to the heart of effective practice and drill design. and there's two real philosophies with this. To answer the question most directly, in our experience, we were training the out-of-system game roughly 60% of the time, and the in-system game roughly 40% of the time in our practice design over the course of a daily and weekly schedule. And that's just because we measured all of the plays, we watched all of the plays in our competition and essentially did the math and found out that most of the time we were playing out of system about slightly more than half of the time. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to train in reality. And so what we did is we made sure that our training percentages in the out of system and in system part of the game matched what we ended up having to do in competition. Now there's another way to look at that, which is to say, okay, if we're playing out of system 60% of the time and in system 40% of the time, we really would love to switch those. We really wish we were in system more often. And so there's an argument to be made that we should train more often in the in-system game because we need more time to get better at it. So I think either one of those is certainly acceptable. And they, as long as because they both follow a principle that you agreed on at the beginning. So I think either one of those is a principle basis for training. You just have to decide whether your top priority is to improve your in-system percentage or train in a way that most closely resembles what you have to do on competition day.
Thank you. Ghislaine, please.
Dans mon équipe et avec mes joueuses, nous avions grosso modo 60% d'entraînement en out of system et 40% en in of system dans un entraînement quotidien par semaine parce que nous avons regardé tous nos matchs en compétition et nous avons remarqué que à plus de 50% nous jouions en out of system et c'est ce qui nous a permis de justement définir nos besoins. Après, c'est à vous et à chacun de savoir, tous les deux sont importants, tous les deux sont principaux, mais c'est à vous de définir vos priorités, c'est à vous de définir si vous voulez améliorer tel ou tel jeu.
Thank you for the answer, Mr. Wine and Ghislaine. Now we jump to Ahmed Samir from Egypt. Is asking if we measure the serve-receive skill and found it 30%. So what is more effective when we design a training, improve reception skill and give it more time, or improve the attack from out of system to cover the week of reception?
Si nous mesurons 30% par exemple pour le service réception, devrions-nous nous concentrer sur la réception et améliorer la compétence à ce niveau, ou devons-nous nous attaquer à partir du out of system pour couvrir nos lacunes en réception?
Fantastic question, which is very much related to our last question, which is, do we emphasize training in reality? Do we emphasize training in practice the way the competition looks, or do we emphasize training differently in practice because we want the competition day to look differently? And the answer is frankly not to choose one or the other. So if, for example, we're passing 30% of the time, the question is, do we train more passing or do we just train more hitting out of system? And what you really need to do is you need to do both. And really it's up to the coach to choose which philosophy he or she's going to go with. What we would do is find a balance between those two. We would perhaps include in additional passing and out of system training, we would make that 80% of our entire practice. So we might eliminate training other skills on certain days and simply split the practice in half, where we are working a lot on service reception to improve it, and yet simultaneously saying, look, we're not there yet. And we know that for a brief period of time into the foreseeable future, we're going to be out of system a lot because our serve receive isn't there. And so we need to train that a lot as well. So we would do both, and we might just do both, or we might only add one other element to our practice so that we're improving both out of system attack and service reception at the same time, and moving the needle on both, if you will.
Thank you very much, Ghislaine.
Donc il ne faut pas donner plus d'importance à l'un ou à l'autre. Il faut en fait faire les deux et trouver un équilibre. l'idéal serait de passer 80%. Donc si nous avons 30%, l'idéal serait de faire 80% de l'entraînement, que ça soit du service réception, et 20%, nous allons l'accorder à une technique additionnelle. Mais le plus important, c'est d'améliorer les lacunes que nous avons, et il est hors de question de travailler une pour oublier l'autre. L'idéal est vraiment de travailler les deux et de faire en sorte que ce 30% s'améliore. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Ghislaine. Now we go to the second question of Ahmed Samir of Egypt about sharing data with a player. Is it better to keep it and design training to improve the skill without knowledge of the player, or share it with the player? And if so, will it motivate him or disappoint him? I think we had this question, but you can go quickly. Ghislaine?
Par rapport au fait d'échanger des données avec les joueurs, est-il mieux de garder ces données pour soi et de customiser l'entraînement sans que l'athlète soit au courant, ou vaut-il mieux prévenir l'athlète et cela va-t-il soit le motiver, soit le démotiver?
It is an excellent question, and I won't pretend I have the perfect answer. I do know that it's player specific. In my experience, what we have done is speak to players and frankly ask them, look, are you someone who would prefer to receive data, or are you someone who would prefer not to receive data? And simply get your feedback based on our practice design, knowing that when you come to practice, if you're spending a lot of time in reception, then you know that the data must have showed that you need more time in reception. And we found both. So the answer to that very tricky question is we do our best to simply involve the players in the process and ask them what they think. Certainly, we've received both answers. Some players don't want to see any data. They just want to see what we bring to practice. Some players want to see some of it, but don't want to get too deep into it. And other players really love to see the data and really get buried in the process. So we've seen all three, and we involve the players in that process to determine whether they want to be deeply involved in the data or not.
Thank you, Ghislaine.
Donc, je n'ai pas la réponse parfaite, ça dépend vraiment de chaque joueur. Le mieux est de rassembler tout le monde et de leur poser la question, à savoir quel genre de personne êtes-vous? Est-ce que vous préférez avoir les informations ou pas? J'ai déjà eu des joueurs qui ne voulaient absolument pas avoir de retour sur les pourcentages et sur les informations que nous étions en train de collecter. Ils voulaient juste savoir quel entraînement nous allions avoir. Certains joueurs voulaient savoir, mais grosso modo sans vraiment rentrer dans les détails. Et j'ai eu d'autres joueurs qui voulaient vraiment s'investir, qui posaient des questions et qui voulaient vraiment tout connaître dans les détails.
Thank you for the questions, for the answers. Now we jump to Marie Wada of Gambia, asking what tool can be used to measure the percentages of the practice plan to reflect game realities.
Quels outils pouvons-nous utiliser pour mesurer la performance pendant l'entraînement et qui reflèteraient la réalité du jeu?
Excellent question again about practice design. The way we did it is we would watch match film, and we would essentially measure the total number of plays, offensive plays, and then we would characterize each play as either in system or out of system, just as we might identify it as a serve-receive play or a transition play. And then we simply just do some basic math to calculate whether that match and whether all of our matches that weekend and over time, whether we play more often in system or out of system, or more often in serve receive and transition. So that's how we figure out how the game is played by us by percentage. And again, yes, we do that. Someone raised the question before about what's our data. Like, we wouldn't make a decision about that over a given weekend. We looked at, say, a half a year, a month's worth of play, 2 months worth of play, 3 months worth of play, and then we even look at it year by year because we have different players. And so once we accumulate a large number of data sets, we are able to determine how much of the game is in transition, how much is in serve receive, and how much is in system and out of system. And once we have percentages, when we're drawing up our practice planning, we simply make sure that the percentage of time that we're working on those things match the percentage of time that we're looking for, which is quite easily done. I mean, if you have a 1 hour practice, which of course you probably have longer, and we're 60% in serve receive and 40% in transition, let's say, then we have 30 minutes of our practice time is based in competition or offense, well, then we would take 60% of the 30 minutes, and then we would use that would be the amount of time that we would spend in serve receive training. And then we would use 40% of that 30 minutes, and we would train the transition game that amount of time. So that's a simple example, but that's essentially how we would do it, to make sure that we were training in reality, or to make sure that our practice percentages were reflecting the amounts of time that we wanted to spend in each phase of the game. And then we would track that and keep records so that by the end of the week, those percentages ended up playing out not just on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis as well.
Thank you very much. Ghislaine, can you go?
Nous avons regardé des matchs, nous avons comptabilisé les jeux offensifs, nous les avons classifiés en in-system et out-of-system. Et c'est vraiment comme ça qu'on a réussi à avoir nos données. À partir de tout ce qu'on a regardé, on a vraiment tout comptabilisé. C'était des pures maths. Nous avons juste collectionné les données et pris en compte tout ce que nous avons regardé, combien de services réception avons-nous fait, combien étaient en out-of-system, combien système, combien était réussi, etc., etc. Et c'est vraiment comme ça qu'on a réussi à avoir une base de données assez fournie pour que nous puissions justement définir nos techniques d'entraînement et customiser nos entraînements comme il le fallait pour justement développer ce que nous voyons dans les matchs réels. Donc, toutes les lacunes que nous avons vues ou tout ce qu'il fallait améliorer dans les matchs, nous les avons regardés, nous les avons comptabilisés et nous les avons appliqués pendant l'entraînement.
Thank you very much for the answer. We jump to the second question of Marie Wad of Gambia. To meet the training need goal, how can the coach modify practice plan to overcome restrictions such as lack of facilities or equipment?
Donc, afin de rejoindre nos objectifs, que devons-nous faire quand nous sommes en manque de moyens?
Phenomenal question. The dilemma of all of us coaches, we all wish we had more time, more equipment, more facilities, right? Fantastic question. Two ways that immediately come to mind are, and this may or may not be right for the level that you're coaching, but is to play small area games. So for example, if I have 12 athletes and I have one court, and I have to work on serve receive, first I think it's important to use both sides of the net, so that at least I can get 2, 3, or 4 athletes on the court. But we can also cut the court in half lengthwise, so we can play in a small area. So we would have a full length court on the left side and a full length court on the right side. So shrinking the court and making a single court, essentially 2 courts for purposes of training, is one way to get additional touches in if you have a lack of courts, for example. So we love small area. We call it small area training, particularly in the warm-up phase of a practice, because it gets everybody more involved and less people standing around not touching the ball and not reading and not getting touches, which are critical to success. Another way is to use our example, if we have one court and 12 athletes, is, and I've done this many places, is rather than run all 12 athletes at once on one court, I may be able to schedule the practice so that I have 6 of the athletes at one time and then 6 of the athletes right after that. So the coach is actually running 2 practices. When I was in college, we actually did that 3 times a day. We would actually sometimes bring 4 athletes out at a time only to increase the amount of feedback that they were getting from our staff, to increase the number of touches they were getting. We would just work in small groups. So we would bring, if we had 12 athletes, we could train 4 of them for 2 hours, and then immediately after 4 of them for 2 hours, and then immediately after 4 of them for 2 hours. So so small groups and multiple practices is a way to deal with few courts or few equipment. Let's say the equipment issue is just 5 volleyballs. It could effectively work the same way. Training in a small area and using multiple sides or small sections of the court or similar drills is another area that we made up the difference. Of course, the coach is working harder, 2 or 3 practices a day, but we enjoyed it. And we love being outside, so it worked well for us.
Thank you very much. Ghislaine?
Donc ma réponse ne va pas forcément correspondre à tous les types de jeux, mais nous avons 2 solutions. Premièrement, il faudrait penser à diviser le terrain en plusieurs petites parties. De ce fait, tout le monde touche la balle et tous les athlètes, tous les joueurs participent, surtout pendant les entraînements, notamment pendant les entraînements, mais surtout aussi sur la phase d'échauffement. Ça permet à tout le monde d'être sur le terrain, justement en divisant le terrain en plus petites parties. La deuxième technique est si nous avons un terrain, par exemple, pour 12 joueurs, même si c'est plus fatigant pour l'entraîneur, même si ça pousse l'entraîneur à faire plus d'heures, l'idéal, ou c'est une idée, serait de diviser le nombre de joueurs en plus petits groupes. Ça m'est déjà arrivé d'entraîner, de faire des entraînements de 2 heures, 3 fois d'affilée, donc pour 4 joueurs ou joueuses à la fois. Donc, diminuer le nombre de joueurs présents pendant l'entraînement et si ce n'est pas possible, rapetisser le terrain et jouer sur des plus petites surfaces. Back to you.
Thank you very much for the answers. Now we jump to the question from Michelle Sanau from Burkina Faso, asking, are the beach volleyball performance measurement tools the same for men and women, for younger and older athletes?
Les outils de mesure des performances de volleyball, de beach volleyball, sont-ils les mêmes pour les 2 genres? Et
yeah, I would say yes. The answer to answer whether the tools are the same, sure. And the tools are videotaping, observation, live recording. So the methods by which we recorded or collected the data are largely the same. Certainly the standards are different. We certainly expect beginners to be performing at a different standard than we would want, say, Olympic level caliber athletes or college athletes. So essentially the same tools, but very different standards and very different goals. Whereas I think when we get to the elite level, it's sometimes in international volleyball, a national federation is measured nearly exclusively on its ability to win gold medals or world championships. And certainly at the younger levels in college, it may be winning a conference or winning a national championship. And obviously at the younger developmental level, it could simply be, did the players have fun? If they were 10 or 11 years old, the question is, did they have enough fun in volleyball that they'll come back? Because if they don't come back, they're certainly not ever going to get any better and have no chance of playing into the future. So standards very different among the age groups, but the tools by which we measured and largely the tools by which we teach, very, very similar.
Thank you very much. Ghislaine?
Donc les outils de mesure et les outils d'entraînement sont exactement les mêmes pour les hommes et les femmes, même si les buts auxquels nous désirons arriver ne sont pas les mêmes, les outils restent les mêmes. Pour donner un exemple, chez l'élite, nous allons voir comment ces outils peuvent nous permettre de mieux gérer une technique, améliorer une technique, etc. Alors que dans un groupe d'école, dans un groupe d'enfants qui ont entre 10 et 11 ans, l'objectif sera, est-ce qu'ils se sont amusés, est-ce qu'ils vont revenir, est-ce qu'ils ont assez touché la balle, etc., etc. Donc oui, nous utilisons les mêmes outils, mais à des fins différentes selon les niveaux de chacun. Back to you.
Thank you very much. We go to the second question of Michelle of Burkina Faso. In one section, Mr. Wine argues that the risk embedded in performance measurement must be taken into account. how can it be?
Dans une des sections, vous avez soutenu qu'il faut prendre en compte le risque intégré dans la mesure de performance. Comment pouvons-nous faire cela?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Was it how are we measuring risk in performance measurement? I'm not sure quite what that means. Was that Alfred? Was that the question?
Yes, she was asking in that you argue that the risk embedded in performance measurement must be taken into account. How can we do about that?
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what that. If I said that, I'm not sure what I meant by that. What risk and what the risk is embedded in performance measurement. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that question is. There certainly are risks. There are risks that disclosing negative information to an athlete could demotivate the athlete. There are risks inherent in measurement, such as if we use too small a sample, we may draw inaccurate conclusions about what the athlete needs, or if we use too small a sample size, the results that we see may be attributable to wind or randomness as opposed to actual performance. So in that sense, there are certainly risks to performance measurement. We've talked, I think, a couple of times about learning about your athletes to determine whether they can mentally handle receiving the information. So that's a way to manage that risk. If the risk is in outside factors influencing the results, then we've talked a little bit about how to avoid that risk by improving the sample size and not drawing early conclusions until we have an adequate pool of performance from the athletes. So those are a couple of risks and the ways that we manage them.
Oh, thank you. Keslin?
Donc, parmi les risques, ça serait de donner des données négatives et ce qui pourrait éventuellement démotiver l'athlète. Et pour cela, nous avons dû donc, mettre en place des solutions, comme par exemple vraiment connaître ces joueurs, savoir s'ils sont capables d'accepter la critique ou d'accepter des données négatives. Si nous avions par exemple un échantillon trop petit, cela allait nous donner des données beaucoup moins exactes que celles que nous devrions avoir, justement parce que l'échantillon est plus petit. Nous faisions en sorte d'avoir tout le temps un échantillon assez grand. Notamment, nous devions, par exemple, connaître les risques extérieurs pour justement savoir y remédier plus tard. Donc oui, il y a des risques, mais après, il faut vraiment, c'est propre à chacun, c'est propre à chaque équipe, et il faut vraiment savoir comment faire ça de son côté.
Thank you very much for the answer. With the advice, we go a little bit quickly this time. We have one question of Lee Chipana from Botswana. How do we keep athletes motivated enough for them to keep working more on their skill that they are not good at, especially since it will most likely be frustrating for them? Kesley?
Comment gardons-nous un athlète motivé quand il doit améliorer une technique, surtout quand c'est non seulement démotivant, mais en plus c'est frustrant pour lui?
It's a fantastic question, and I really wish that I could sit here and pretend to everybody that I knew the answer to that question. I can tell you things I've tried and that have been successful, and probably share with you 100 things I've tried and been really unsuccessful and have been completely wrong on. However, let's start with this. I think there's a lot of great research out there, led by Daniel Pink, by the way, who's written some really great books on human motivation, and which show that humans are most motivated by being shown improvement over time or progress in their work. And so regardless of what industry you're in, and certainly including athletes, that people are most motivated by seeing that they're improving or to see progress in their goals. And so for us, one of the things that we try to do to motivate athletes is to show them that they are improving over time, and collecting data and measuring performance is a fantastic way to do that. Because sometimes it takes weeks or months to show improvement over time. And if we're not recording the data or measuring the performance, we can't really just use our eye test and then give performance feedback over the period of a month, because we're not possible. We're not capable of remembering all of that data, particularly if we have multiple athletes. So measuring performance and showing improvement over time is the single most effective way to keep athletes motivated. Another way is through the coach's feedback. Providing feedback is at the heart of what we as coaches do. And again, there's a lot of research and that shows that positive feedback improves and enhances motivation, and can in fact even improve the development of motor skills more than negative feedback. So again, pointing out what the positive takeaways are. That's part of the coach's skill, is to find positives in things that may appear to be negative. But the more positive feedback we can find for our athletes, as opposed to negative feedback, and the more times we can show that they are improving over time, the better positioned us coaches will be to motivate our athletes. And lastly, measuring performance over time unquestionably will show improvement or progress, because it's nearly impossible for an athlete to train regularly at a skill for a month, 2 months, or 3 months over time and not show improvement. It's just almost unheard of for that to happen. So if we do our job well and we be patient, eventually we'll be able to show our athletes improvement, and that will be a great motivator.
Thank you, Coach. Ghislaine?
Yes. Donc, il y a évidemment, j'ai essayé beaucoup de choses. Je peux vous donner une centaine de choses que j'ai essayées qui ont marché, tout comme je peux vous donner une centaine de choses que j'ai essayées qui n'ont pas marché. Donc, il y a évidemment beaucoup de recherches qui montrent que les êtres humains sont le plus motivés lorsqu'on leur montre du progrès et une amélioration dans leur travail. Et ce, à travers le temps, donc sur une durée de 3 mois, 6 mois, 1 an, etc. C'est notre travail de faire une collecte de données pour pouvoir justement leur montrer cette amélioration, parce que nous ne pouvons pas juste tout enregistrer dans notre tête, puisque nous avons beaucoup d'athlètes. Nous ne pouvons pas enregistrer chaque amélioration de technique pour chaque joueur, par exemple, sur une durée de 3 mois. C'est impossible. Ensuite, le feedback du coach, les retours du coach doivent être absolument importants. C'est le travail du coach de faire en sorte de trouver quelque chose de positif à partager avec son athlète, de manière à, avec ses athlètes, pardon, de manière à les motiver. Parce que n'importe quel feedback positif va forcément motiver les joueurs et faire en sorte que leur motivation reste haute. Et finalement, il faut absolument mesurer les techniques, comme nous l'avons dit, parce que ce n'est pas possible qu'un athlète qui a des lacunes dans une certaine skill continue à avoir ces lacunes et qu'il ne s'améliore jamais. Il va forcément s'améliorer à un moment ou à un autre, et c'est important que nous soyons là pour justement apporter des chiffres et montrer que oui, il y a une amélioration, et elle est de temps. Back to you.
Alfred?
Thank you. Yes, please.
May I interrupt? I found that research that we were talking about earlier, and which I promised the audience the title. There was a question earlier about whether there were trends in men's and women's beach volleyball regarding shots and spike hits, and so there is research that was done in 2019 out of Germany, and it was by Daniel Link and Sebastian Wenninger, and the article is called "Performance Streaks in Elite Beach Volleyball: Does Failure in One Side Out Affect Attacking in the Next?" So interested listeners may want to look that up. I believe it's available for free if through Google Scholar. If they research that, they should be able to find that.
Well, thank you, Coach, for the contribution, Ghislaine.
Donc j'ai trouvé la recherche dont je vous avais parlé. Elle a été faite en Allemagne en 2019 par Daniel Link. Le nom de cette recherche, c'est la performance de l'élite de beach volleyball. Vous pouvez forcément la trouver, mais je pense qu'il y aura, je pense moi personnellement, Lisa, qu'il va y avoir le lien quelque part pour que vous puissiez y accéder.
Thank you very much. We jump now to Gladys Munger of Kenya. She's asking, when I have one pair of beach players, is it advisable to train completely one player to be an offensive and concentrate, and another one as defensive?
Donc, lorsque nous avons deux joueurs en beach volleyball, est-ce que c'est judicieux d'entraîner un uniquement au bloc et un à l'arrière ou pas?
Not entirely sure what that question was. I think it was, if I have a pair or two players, should I train one as offensive and one as defensive? If I understand the question, yes. We'll want to train both athletes in both skills. So we'll want to train both athletes or both members of the pair as offensive players, because they'll both need to side out or score in transition. And we'll want to train both to play defense, and that includes blocking or defending. So, I think if I understand the question, that we'll aim for the most well-rounded training. We'll train all of our athletes in the most amount of skills that we can, because we will hope on game day that they're more well-rounded than if we just allow them to specialize in one phase of the game.
Thanks, coach. Ghislaine?
Donc, les deux membres doivent être entraînés pour les deux performances. Tous les deux doivent être entraînés au bloc, tous les deux doivent être entraînés à être à l'arrière. Il est très, très important de développer les mêmes aptitudes, les mêmes techniques chez les deux joueurs de façon égale. Back to you.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Rina Ibrahimo of Mozambique, asking, how does the measurement contribute to develop the player's growth directly?
Comment est-ce que les mesures que nous prenons permettent aux joueurs de se développer directement?
Could you repeat that, Alfred, for me, please?
Yes, please. Yes, please. The question is, how does the measurement contribute to develop the player's growth directly?
What is the last word?
Directly.
Oh, how does the measurement contribute to growth directly? Thank you. Well, I guess nothing is directly. I guess it's all indirect. It's a system by which the measurement contributes to growth, because the measurement identifies what the weaknesses are, and working on weaknesses is what promotes growth. So there isn't a direct connection between measurement and growth. It's just that measurement is at one end of a process and growth at the other. Insofar as to grow, we need to work on the things that we're not great yet at. And in order to determine what those things are, we think it's really important to measure the performances and see from an objective standard what those weak areas are, so we can train them more often. So that's the way that we think measuring performance contributes to growth, because it allows us to identify weaknesses and then spend time on weaknesses that will change us into an improved player.
Sure. Thank you. Ghislaine?
Donc rien n'est direct, c'est un système. Le fait de mesurer des performances est un système qui permet de définir les lacunes, de trouver ces lacunes, de les définir et les identifier. Ensuite, ça sera un travail sur l'amélioration de ces lacunes et de ces manquements. Et finalement, c'est ce travail sur ces lacunes et sur cette performance basse, on va dire, qui va faire en sorte que la performance globale, indirectement, va être améliorée. Donc, il n'y a pas de travail direct, tout sera en indirect. Et au final, on a les lacunes d'un côté, on a l'amélioration de l'autre côté, et c'est quelque chose qui va affecter un côté, et ce côté ensuite va affecter l'autre. Back to you.
Thank you very much. We have second question of Rina Ibrahimo, but she's asking, how can we measure the skill of the players? But I think we answered this already. So maybe we go to the third question. Is asking, is it possible to measure the performance of our opponents in a tournament in order to gain advantage?
Est-ce est-ce que c'est possible de mesurer les capacités, la performance d'un adversaire pendant une compétition pour justement trouver des avantages à leurs lacunes, pour que leurs lacunes soient à notre avantage?
A terrific question. Absolutely. And the way that we measure it is exactly the way we measure our own team's performance. So largely that's done by video, and then so almost all matches are videoed. Where I train in college, and certainly at the international level, there are many cameras on every court. So yeah, recording the matches and then recording the opponent's performance exactly the way you would record your own team's performance is the way that you can start to gain information about your opponent. So, you know, keep in mind that's always for next time. So it's advanced scouting. So we're scouting opponents and then keeping those records for use next time we play them. There's very little work being done right now in beach volleyball, which is using in-game data in that current game. So right now, what's not being done is during a match, measuring what the players are doing and then using that data in-game. That's just not happening that much. Most rules, both in college in the United States and in international, forbid that. So forbid the use of cameras to record matches and then develop data and use it in that same game. That's usually prohibited by rule. So the in-game coach may be writing some things down and keeping track on a notepad and providing players some feedback in-game during a timeout. But that's the most that would be done. And in most areas, beach volleyball doesn't allow the coach to speak to the players a lot during competition. So that's a very limited utility. Usually it's measuring for a future game against that opponent.
Thanks, Coach. Ghislaine?
Oui, absolument. Et dans l'idéal, nous prenons ces mesures ou nous faisons ces mesures exactement comme nous les faisons pour nous-mêmes. C'est-à-dire qu'il faudrait filmer un match, filmer notre équipe et ensuite filmer l'autre équipe pour pouvoir justement en déduire des conclusions et faire des mesures pour le match prochain, tout en sachant que là, le match auquel nous venons de jouer est déjà fini, donc ces informations seront utilisées pour la prochaine fois. Néanmoins, il y a très peu de travail qui est fait par rapport à ça. Il me semble que c'est illégal de filmer un match et d'ensuite traduire donc, ce match en données. Donc l'idéal, ce serait que le coach prenne des notes pendant le match pour qu'il puisse être décortiqué à la fin du match ou après celui-là. Active.
Thank you very much. Now we have Isaac Tengalani from Botswana. Challenges we are having as we just beach volleyball a couple of years ago. Competition statistics and the training statistics differ a lot, and the improvement is done or can be achieved by a lot of games. Now, as a developing nation in beach volleyball, how do you ascertain the use of statistical measures to improve your athletes? Ghislaine?
Donc nous avons énormément de défis, étant donné que le volleyball est un nouveau sport dans notre pays. Nous avons les statistiques de compétition et les statistiques d'entraînement diffèrent énormément. Comment pouvons-nous être sûrs d'utiliser les bonnes statistiques pour pouvoir améliorer notre beach volleyball?
As I understand the question, it was how are we using statistics to improve the athletes?
Sure.
So yeah, as we've been discussing, I mean, we're using the statistics to identify where the athletes are strong and where they are weak, or where they are proficient and not proficient yet, and then using that data to train athletes more often in practice where they're weak and less often where they're strong. I mean, that's essentially how we're using the data to improve athletes.
Thank you very much, Coach. Ghislaine?
Donc, grosso modo, nous collectons des données Et nous en faisons des chiffres que nous allons utiliser pour justement cibler les lacunes, cibler les faiblesses et pouvoir les développer durant l'entraînement et éventuellement durant un match.
All right, thank you. Now we jump into second question of Isaac. When taking stats of defense, do you include blocking and attacking as well? Ghislaine?
Lorsque nous prenons en compte les statistiques de défense, est-ce que le bloc et l'attaque sont prises en compte?
Absolutely. So certainly we focus a little bit more on the offense than on the defense. And that's partly because we think that we know that offense is more important to winning. Again, not suggesting that defense is not important. That would be a mistake to suggest that. And partly because we are not yet perfect either, just like our players, and we wish we want to do more with defense, and we want to measure it more, and that's our coaches. That's our coaching job, is to get better at what we do. But sure, we can measure the number of blocks. It's pretty easily done, again, by video, or probably just live in a match, because there's not many of them in a match. And same with digs. We certainly can measure the number of digs or defensive plays that we get in a match, again, by the video. We can, and we could even express them as percentages. So to say that we got 10 digs in a match probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but to say that we got 10 digs out of 19 opponent attacks tells us that a little bit more information. It tells us about how often percentage-wise we're digging the ball. And yes, we also count kills in transition, so attacks in transition. And generally speaking, we don't doesn't mean that everyone has to follow this, but we don't keep a count of the number of digs, because the number of transition attacks generally tells us how many digs that we got.
Thank you, Coach. Ghislaine?
Oui, certainement. Donc, nous sommes plus concentrés sur l'attaque pour nous, car cela nous permet de gagner. Donc, ça, c'est notre technique d'entraînement. Nous sommes moins concentrés sur la défense parce que ce n'est pas dans notre manière de jouer. Nous attelons plus à l'attaque. Après, c'est très, très facile de collecter ce genre de répertorier ce genre de données, par exemple, sur combien d'attaques ont été récupérées en manchette. Ça, c'est assez facile à calculer. Les manchettes ne sont pas très, très nombreuses. Ça nous permet ensuite de faire des pourcentages, etc. Et à partir de là, de savoir comment est-ce qu'il faut développer quoi et de quelle manière. Back to you.
Thank you very much. This question, you just said it in a previous question, but maybe you can go quickly. Is from Kenneth Kondo of Zimbabwe. Often coaches are not aware of the process of measurement and data collection. What kind of skill is required for data collection and analysis? Ghislaine?
Très souvent, les coachs ne savent pas comment mesurer et répertorier ces données. Quel genre de connaissances devrons-nous avoir pour la collecte et l'analyse de ces données?
Wonderful question. The first skill in data collection is to be precise, or to be accurate, because we're making training decisions around what the data is telling us. It's really important that the data be accurate. So there's a lot of mathematical calculations and there's a lot of data entry. So accuracy in precision is the single most important thing that we coaches can do, because if their data is wrong because we're making mistakes, then we're really just training the wrong thing. And knowing what to measure is something that will come with time, but knowing what to measure and what matters and what doesn't matter in the game is something that's really important. And also what's important is understanding that is to not collect so much data that you don't have time to interpret it, because the data is valuable only insofar as we can draw meaning from it. And if we have so many numbers that we can't possibly interpret what they mean, then that too would be a mistake. So knowing what to measure knowing not to collect too much, and being accurate are three skills that I think are very important.
Thank you, Coach. Ghislaine?
Donc, il faut être, premièrement, il faut être précis. Il faut être très, très précis et pointilleux sur la collecte des données parce que justement, l'entraînement va être basé sur cette collecte de données. Et si il y a une erreur mathématique, s'il y a une erreur statistique, s'il y a une erreur d'étude de ces statistiques, et bien, au final, on va se retrouver à devoir faire un entraînement qui entraîne pour la mauvaise chose ou qui entraîne pour quelque chose qui n'est pas nécessaire. Deuxièmement, il faut savoir ce qu'il faut mesurer. Donc ça, après, ça vient avec le temps. C'est très important que le coach sache ce qu'il faut mesurer comme données et ensuite comment utiliser ça en sa faveur. Et troisièmement, il ne faut pas avoir... Donc la plus grosse erreur à faire, ça serait de...
Hello, I think there's an interference with Ghislaine. Probably we go to the second question of Kenneth Kondo of Zimbabwe. Have you been able to compare teams that do not use data-based training programs against those that do so? If so, how wide is the performance gap in general and on specific aspects of the game?
Could you repeat that question, please?
Yes, please. How have you been able to compare teams that do not use data-based training programs against those that do so? If so, how wide is the performance gap in general and on specific aspects of the game?
Fabulous question. What a great question that is.
Sorry, Ghislaine, are you there? Ghislaine? Ghislaine, are you there?
Yes, I came back. I'm sorry. My apologies.
No problem. Please, training programs against those that do so. If so, how wide is the performance gap in general and on specific aspects of the game? Can you translate, Ghislaine?
Of course. Est-ce que vous avez déjà essayé de comparer les équipes qui, justement, ne basent pas leur système d'entraînement sur cette étude de statistiques, cette étude de données? Et dans ce cas, quel est l'écart entre ces deux équipes en termes de jeu?
Excellent question. The most direct answer is no. We've never had an opportunity to take a group of players training where we're measuring performance under a system we're describing and then compare them over time to a group of players that aren't using that system. It's just not possible. It's just not possible. So that we don't have a direct comparison. What our experience does tell us, however, though, is that I have seen improvement in teams and players that I have been fortunate enough to be around and be able to train when I was a younger coach and didn't know some of these things and didn't discover this process. And I saw the rate of growth of those players. And I have been able to compare my own experience with those players with my own experience with the players after I discovered that it was fairly important for me to start to measure performance and use that information in training. And so in terms of that comparison, what I've seen is a marked improvement in the developmental rate of the players who are training more intelligently. And by training more intelligently, I mean spending more time training on things that they need to get better at and less time training outside of their areas, their needed areas of improvement.
Thanks, Coach. Ghislaine?
Donc non, nous n'avons jamais fait ça. C'est quasiment impossible. C'est quasiment impossible de faire ça. Nous n'avons pas de comparaison, justement. En revanche, ce que j'ai pu faire, c'est entraîner une équipe donc quand j'étais plus jeune, et ensuite les revoir quelques temps après, une fois que j'ai commencé à pratiquer ce système d'entraînement, donc le système d'entraînement de collecte de données et d'utilisation de statistiques, et nous avons vu une nette amélioration dans le niveau de ces athlètes, pardon. C'est ce que j'appelle un entraînement intelligent. C'est un entraînement où le plus important est pris en charge, et c'est un entraînement orienté justement sur les lacunes et sur tous les points qu'il faut développer.
Thank you very much. Now we have the question from Fidinirina Andriana Rijaona from Madagascar. Can you give some example of technique and the possibility to act on the motivation of the player, because the motivational structure of every individual in a team is different and varies from according to the development of the personality?
Could you repeat that for me, please?
Yes, please. Can you give some examples of technique and the possibility to act on the motivation of the player, because the motivational structure of every individual in a team is different and varies according to the development of the personality? Ghislaine?
Pouvez-vous nous donner quelques exemples de techniques et possibilités pour agir sur la motivation du joueur, car la structure émotionnelle de tout individu dans une équipe est différente et varie selon le développement de la personnalité? Back to you.
Well, as I understand, the question is again about motivation of players, and there's no question in my experience that the motivation changes from player to player. Some players, if they are involved in spending a lot of time on things they're not great at in practice, that can be very demotivating. Other players are able to handle that quite well. Some players need to feel as though they're having success in practice more often than others. And neither one of those is better or worse, or stronger or not strong. That's the nature of human beings. We all come from different places and have different motivations. And so as I understand the question about motivation, I certainly agree that the motivations differ. They differ among our players. They differ from team to team, year to year. And I think it's the coach's job simply to find out about his or her players. What does motivate each one of the players on the team? What motivates the team collectively? And how do those things change from year to year? It is critically important to learn as much as we can about our players, motivation being one factor, because it is often through those things outside of performance or outside of sports that allow us coaches to reach them in a motivating way. I think that it's really, really critically important to figure out for each player what is her motivation.
Thank you. Ghislaine, please.
Donc effectivement, chaque joueur est différent de l'autre. Chaque personnalité est différente selon l'âge, selon l'équipe dans laquelle la personne joue. Donc oui, effectivement, c'est très compliqué de savoir comment les motiver. Mon conseil serait vraiment de connaître ces joueurs un maximum, de leur parler autant que possible et faire en sorte justement de connaître un minimum les connaître un minimum à l'extérieur du jeu et de la performance, parce que c'est justement ça qui va nous permettre d'avoir un impact sur leur motivation et de savoir justement comment leur parler. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Second question of Fidinirina. How can we have a quality reception during international competition if in a team all local opponents do not serve well?
Could you repeat that again? I didn't get the second half of that.
How can we have a quality reception during international competition if in a team all local opponents do not serve well?
If if they don't serve well, if the opponent doesn't serve well?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
How can we have a quality reception?
Got it.
Ghislaine?
Comment pouvons-nous avoir une réception de qualité ou une qualité de réception pendant la compétition internationale si une des équipes ou notre propre équipe n'effectue pas un bon service?
Yeah, the question raises a number of issues, and it's a great topic. As I understand, the question is asking if the opponent isn't serving well, can we trust our reception statistics? In other words, if the opponent is serving weak, our reception is probably going to look unusually strong. I'll address that first, and that's true. That absolutely happens. The numbers may indicate that we performed exceptionally well on a given weekend in competition, and that may just be because we played opponents who were weak servers. That's certainly true. The way we deal with that is two things. One, we as coaches know that there's more, that these statistics that we take isn't the only part of our coaching. So presumably we watch that and we can read these statistics in light of the fact that we watched the opponent and we know that the opponent wasn't serving strong that day. So we can read the statistics in context. That's an important part of that first part of the question. The other part is seeing it. We can see that whether our technique was right, whether it was optimal, whether there were things about the technique that looked good, and that is positive for us, regardless of what the opponent was doing. So regardless of who's serving or how strong, if our technique is sound, if we're communicating well, and if our movement is efficient, and if we're reading the serve, those are all positive things that we can, that are good signs for us, regardless of what the opponent is doing in terms of strength of serve.
Thanks, Coach Ghislaine.
Donc cela soulève énormément de problématiques, ça arrive beaucoup. Le plus important, c'est de savoir comment utiliser nos statistiques et comment ces statistiques peuvent nous aider dans notre contexte, premièrement. Et deuxièmement, il faut vraiment regarder nos techniques à nous, regarder comment nos joueurs se comportent, regarder si c'était bon, si la technique était bonne, etc. Et c'est ce qui compte le plus, parce qu'au final, c'est ce qui va motiver nos joueurs et c'est ce qui va faire que ça aura un impact positif sur leur performance.
Thanks for the answers. Now we have a question from Isene Bokor from Morocco, asking, in beach volleyball and precisely at the training level, can the coach himself create new and unheard of situations out of system depending on the level of the next opponent? Ghislaine?
En beach volleyball et précisément lors de l'entraînement, est-ce que l'entraîneur peut créer lui-même des situations out of system pour, enfin, qui sont développées en fonction de l'adversaire au prochain match?
Yeah, I think the question was, can the coach create out of system or situations ahead of the next opponent? And absolutely, that's why we, an earlier question asked us whether we were able to keep statistics about opponents. That's one of the reasons why we do that. And the best type of training in advance of a match is training that gets us ready for that match. So absolutely, there's a lot of ways to do that. We may have collected information about the opponent, and we may know that one passer is stronger than the other. We may know that that one hitter or another prefers certain locations of the court in certain situations. We may know that if we move a player to the sideline and he attacks or she attacks by the antenna, that player is more or less likely, has hitting tendencies. So we will use that data to learn that. And sure, we absolutely will train that in advance. We can get some practice players in or other coaches to help us replicate or repeat in practice the way we anticipate our opponents will play. Other ways we can do it is get people, training partners who are of similar size or handedness, they're right-handed or left-handed, to, again, recreate the experience that we expect from our opponents. It's an excellent, excellent way to train.
Thank you very much. Ghislaine?
Donc oui, justement, le coach peut faire ça, le ou la coach d'ailleurs. Et cette question est en relation avec la question précédente qui demandait si c'était possible d'étudier justement les statistiques de l'équipe adversaire. Ça, c'est une des façons de le faire. Donc il faut vraiment pouvoir avoir d'une façon ou d'une autre des informations sur les adversaires, savoir comment ils se déplacent, comment ils jouent, quelles sont leurs lacunes, comment est-ce qu'ils... si une balle est placée à tel endroit, comment est-ce que l'adversaire va la récupérer, etc., etc. Et de cette manière, donc, soit nous allons jouer avec ou faire jouer nos joueurs de façon à ce qu'il y ait une partie de l'équipe qui mime ce comportement, donc le comportement de l'adversaire, ou sinon avoir ce qu'on appelle des partenaires de jeu. Et ces partenaires de jeu vont jouer effectivement le rôle de l'adversaire et mimer les réactions de l'adversaire que nous aurons au préalable étudiées et notées pour préparer donc, notre équipe à jouer contre ses adversaires. Back to you.
Well, thank you very much for the answers. The second question is, to what extent can statistics influence the nature and choice of training exercises?
Donc, dans quelle mesure est-ce que les statistiques peuvent influencer la nature et le choix des entraînements ou des exercices d'entraînement?
Well, a great question. It's really the heart of what we've been talking about this afternoon, in that we do think that statistics can alter, change, influence the nature of our training choices and practices. Absolutely. Again, what the statistics do is to identify things that we're not yet proficient at, and that will then influence our decision to train that thing more, whatever skill that is. The best practices are the practices that have the players most often engaged in the skills that they need most time to improve. It's not particularly, while it may be very motivating and certainly fun to train the things that we're best at for the athlete that wants to see improvement, it is better to be spending most of our training time on the skills or in the situations that we're not yet best at, and statistics allow us to determine what those things are.
Thank you very much, Ghislaine.
Donc les statistiques peuvent altérer et modifier notre manière d'entraînement, puisque ça nous permet en fait de voir où sont nos lacunes, où sont nos faiblesses, et c'est ce qui va moduler notre entraînement. Finalement, un entraînement, il faut qu'il se base sur les points dans lesquels nous sommes les plus faibles pour pouvoir les modifier, pour pouvoir les améliorer, pour pouvoir améliorer la performance et du coup pouvoir éventuellement gagner. Donc voilà comment les statistiques affectent et influencent l'entraînement ou les exercices d'entraînement. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Now we have the questions from Munir Gelami from Algeria. From what age or what category do we start doing this kind of measurement? Yes,
à partir de quel âge ou à partir de quelle catégorie pouvons-nous commencer à effectuer ce genre de mesures et de collecte de données?
Great question. I don't know the perfect answer. Certainly at elite levels, it's a must. It just simply must be done, in my opinion, to make sure that we're training effectively. At least in college in the United States, I think it's an essential part of running effective training practices. I think it is an important part and should be followed widely on the United States domestic professional tour. At the juniors level, that's where I think reasonable people could disagree or differ on it. But I think even at the juniors level, in any area, it's important to begin a process of measuring, and just it doesn't have to be as detailed as we've talked about. It doesn't have to be all skills and all phases of the game. It may just be that you have younger players and you just want to look at one thing. You just want to look at, and it could be simple. It could just be, I'm just going to look at how many times we serve the ball in the court. And it could be just that. And as they get older, you might just say, I just want to look at how often we serve the ball in the court. And I want to look at how often we keep the ball in play when we attack it. So I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a great way to approach the game. And so it's for each coach really to answer that question about when should I begin a process of measurement, and how simple should the process be? Certainly, it doesn't have to be complex, and it doesn't have to take up a whole lot of the coach's time for this process to produce favorable results and improve the way that we train our athletes. It's a great question, but I think we can start it at a simple way when the players are quite young.
Donc nous pouvons commencer. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Nous pouvons commencer à tout âge. Évidemment, chez l'élite et chez les joueurs professionnels, c'est beaucoup plus intéressant et c'est quasiment une obligation de le faire pour pouvoir avoir des entraînements efficaces. Après, comme on l'a dit avant, nous pouvons très bien commencer avec des enfants en bas âge et savoir combien de services, par exemple, ont été faits, est-ce qu'ils se sont amusés, est-ce qu'ils ont bien joué, est-ce que la balle est restée dans le terrain. Quand ils grandiront, ensuite, ce sera combien de passes ont été faites après le service, combien de temps est-ce que la balle est restée dans le terrain. Donc ça dépend vraiment de chaque coach. Il n'y a pas de mal à faire ce genre de statistiques, à faire ce genre d'études. C'est toujours intéressant, c'est toujours positif, ça apporte toujours quelque chose. Et on peut évidemment commencer avec les tout jeunes. Back to you.
Thank you very much. The second question is, in beach volleyball, from what moment will we define the out of system? Ghezlen?
Dans le beach volleyball, à partir de quel moment définissons-nous un out of system?
Terrific question. I love the question. My approach, I don't know if it's the best approach, is to we define a play as out of system based on the first contact. That's what we use. What that produces, obviously, is a situation where the set may improve the first contact and get the hitter to a very favorable location to attack. We still would call that an out of system play because I've defined it as an out of system play based on the first contact. And so that may not be the approach that someone else decides to use. They may call a play in system as long as the second contact improves the location of the ball. And that nobody's right or wrong. It's a preference and it's that coaches use. And I see merit in both approaches, but we've just defined it based on the first contact.
Donc selon moi, comme je l'ai défini, un out of system se définit à partir du premier contact. Donc là, c'est une situation où la passe modifie la place du passeur, et qui permet de marquer un point. Certains proposent que ça soit le deuxième contact qui permette de replacer la balle, mais personnellement, c'est la première définition qui marche pour moi et c'est la première que j'utilise.
Oh, thank you very much. Because of time, I'll be asking only one question per person so that we meet the time. Now we have a question from Osvaldo Machava from Mozambique. As a national coach, we have the challenge of choosing the best athletes to represent our countries. How can we use the available indicators to create a selection model in working set, and what are the risks? Ghezlen?
Donc, en tant que coach national, nous avons le défi de choisir les meilleurs athlètes pour représenter notre pays. Comment pouvons-nous choisir, donc, comment pouvons-nous utiliser les indicateurs que nous avons, donc les données que nous avons, pour justement créer un modèle de sélection de ces joueurs et quels en sont les risques?
Phenomenal question. What I'll propose is we discuss first how to use the system, the data system, to choose the best, and then we'll discuss what the many risks in that second, I think. It's a great question. And one could envision a situation in which a national federation has competitions, and they track or stat a number of events in the game, wins and losses, attack percentage, most blocks, whatever they choose to measure, and simply identifies from the stats who are the best attackers, who's the best offenders, and select players based on their performance data alone. That's a system. I don't know if any country in the world would do it, because there are a huge number of risks inherent in it, such as we have to, I think, a selection of national team players is the selection of any team. There are things that don't show up in data. Process often doesn't show up in data. Technique sometimes doesn't show up in data. If we don't have enough data, that's a risk. If we took data for 2 weeks and then picked our team, it may be that wasn't good enough, because maybe our best players just happened not to have played well enough in that 2-week break. Maybe they were sick, maybe they were injured. Maybe it was just random that our best players didn't perform their best in the time that we took our statistics. And because the statistics don't keep track of who won, and winning, sometimes athletes just can win, and we don't necessarily know how, and sometimes the statistics would indicate that they shouldn't be winning, but the skill of knowing how to win is something that often our numbers can't explain, and yet there are athletes who simply know how to win in moments, and anyone in sports knows that, and our statistical system doesn't take account of that, and that is a crucially important thing that we would want to know about athletes if we were selecting a team.
Ghislaine?
Très bien. Donc, une fédération nationale, par exemple, pendant une compétition, peut traquer, excusez-moi, le nombre de gains et de pertes d'une équipe. Automatiquement, cela va faire ressortir, ou peu importe quel autre tracking, mais il va y avoir une collecte de données. Et justement, cette collecte de données va définir les meilleurs selon le système qu'on aura choisi. Si on choisit un système de gains et de pertes, peut-être qu'on va avoir le meilleur passeur, le meilleur setter, etc., etc. Et de cette façon, nous aurons défini les meilleurs. Néanmoins, il y a énormément de risques, notamment le fait que la performance, la technique, le processus ne rentre pas dans notre collecte de données, ça ne rentre pas dans les statistiques, tout comme, excusez-moi, tout ça, ce sont des risques. Excusez-moi, ce sont des risques. Donc, le fait qu'il n'y ait pas la technique, le processus qui soit quantifié par des statistiques, donc tout ça, ce sont des risques. Tout comme le fait que, imaginons que cette compétition dure 2 semaines et pendant les 2 semaines, on a une équipe qui ne joue pas très bien. Ces deux semaines de collecte de données ne sont pas assez suffisantes pour justement connaître le niveau de ces joueurs qui d'habitude joueraient peut-être beaucoup mieux. Et dernièrement, des fois, nous avons des équipes qui ne sont pas censées gagner. Donc statistiquement, par rapport aux chiffres, les chiffres nous disent qu'ils ne doivent pas gagner, qu'ils n'ont pas normalement la capacité de gagner, et justement ils gagnent avec des hauts scores. Et donc ça aussi, c'est un risque. Il y a des joueurs qui savent juste gagner, ils savent jouer, ils savent gagner. Et ça, c'est quelque chose que les chiffres ne nous donnent pas. Et donc, c'est un risque. Ce sont des choses qu'on n'arrive pas à expliquer, avec lesquelles il faut juste faire. Back to you.
Thanks for the answers. Now we have a question from Joel Matthews of Namibia. You mentioned various factors that contribute to players passing out of the system repeatedly. What is your advice to coaches in terms of training focus? What is the best method to overcome these factors, especially with the players that have low levels of skill proficiency? Ghislaine?
Donc, vous avez mentionné le fait qu'il y ait plusieurs facteurs. Vous avez mentionné le fait qu'il existe plusieurs facteurs qui vont affecter ou forcer les passeurs à faire des passes en out of system. Quels sont vos conseils pour les coachs pour qu'ils puissent justement les pousser à plus se concentrer dans le jeu, et quelles sont les meilleures méthodes pour justement outrepasser cela, surtout quand nous avons des joueurs qui ont un niveau pas très élevé de jeu, un niveau de jeu pas très élevé.
Great question. I don't know. What are the best ways to improve passing? I wish I knew. It's such a puzzle. I think that some of the things that we have seen that work well is helping players to have a routine in serve receive. I think that helps a lot. I think often coaches talk to servers about having a routine, but I think serve receive passers should have a routine as well. Sometimes that routine, as we all know in beach volleyball, is to slap the hand of her teammate, right? That hand slap. That's a great routine in beach volleyball that I think helps players perform their best on the next play. I think stressing the opportunity for players to have to read or anticipate the flight of the ball. So just as we coaches teach players to read or anticipate when they're playing defense, I think that's important to stress to serve receive passers, because at the end of the day, it's not altogether different than defense. We're still trying to read the location and the direction of a ball that's flying at us, keeping it from hitting the ground on our side of the court. So teaching players to read and start to anticipate where the ball is going and what direction and how fast and its depth, whether we have to move forward or back is really important, I think. Just recently, I mentioned human contact. Just recently, in the last 6 months, I did some research that we found that players who are working on serve receive, in between each repetition, giving their teammates a high five or that hand slap that we know is so traditional in our sport, we found that influenced the ability of the players to perform better on the next play. So players who did that generally performed better than players who didn't do that. So when do players not do that? If we have players in a drill where they don't have somebody next to them, where they're just receiving serves in a blocked format, so they're just passing and passing and passing, and they don't have that experience of somebody next to them, like we do in a so those are 3 things that I have in my experience found contributed positively to improved reception. I wish I knew it all. I certainly don't. And I'm still trying to find out additional ways to help players receive or serve better.
Brad, please. Hello?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne. I would like only to make a remark. I would like to ask you about how to use scoring variations in solving some problems of the measurement. Okay, because the floor for you. Okay.
Scoring variations are.
Please, excuse me.
Oh.
Please, maybe Ghislaine can translate about that question.
Really sorry. Donc je ne sais pas, c'est très important de faire en sorte que les joueurs aient des routines. Il faut apprendre aux joueurs de connaître leur balle. de les lire, de les anticiper, de connaître la vitesse, de deviner ou de lire l'orientation et où cette balle va arriver. Et il y a une étude qui disait que le fait que les joueurs donc se checkent, qui se tapent dans la main l'un de l'autre, ça les aidait à faire mieux dans le match prochain, et il faut absolument favoriser le contact humain dans le match. Pour la question de Monsieur Sherif, donc comment est-ce que la variation du comptage, comment pouvons-nous utiliser ça pour régler les soucis de collecte de données?
Thank you, Ghislaine. But did you also ask the question of Mr. Sherif?
She already asked.
Okay, thank you. Coach?
We're on to scoring variations.
Yes.
Yes. As the question of scoring variations is a great one. I mean, scoring variations in practice and training are, I think, essential to success. One of the ways we've scored things is we can score things to create pressure, and creating pressure in practice is really important. So, for example, if a player is working on serve receive, we may require them to, in order to have success in the drill, we may require them to score reception 2 or 3 times in a row. So an in-system reception twice. If they were going to pass 10 or 15 balls, the last 2 have to be in a row and in system. It could be 3 in a row in system. So that's a scoring variation that we use quite a bit, because it creates pressure in how the player feels, as opposed to just getting 10 repetitions and leaving the drill. They have to get 9, but then the last 10, the 9 and 10 have to be in a row. We've done that quite often. Wash scoring drills are really, really important for our training. Another thing that we've done is require things to be done twice in a row, 3 in a row, 4 times in a row in order to score a point. One of the major things that I think is important in beach volleyball is the ability of an athlete not just to perform her skill, but to do it repetitively. We think precision and repetition, or repeatability, in volleyball is really important. And so often we require players in order to score a point, to do things repeatedly or repetitively. So if I perform my skills, if I get a kill, I don't get a point. I have to show that I can get another kill in a row, or I have to show that I can get 3 kills in a row. Because repeatability in our sport, I think, is really what separates good from great. I think good players can do things well. Great players can do things well 3 out of 4 times, 4 out of 5 times, 6 out of 7 times with less variation. That's just a couple of scoring variations that we use. But wash scoring and so-called in a row things are something that we rely on very heavily.
Wayne, if you allow me to add also that when we have some problems, I mean,
please, Mr. Sherif, if you can allow Gisli to translate that first.
I need her to translate all the information. Okay, together. Okay. I mean, if we have some problems when you do the measurements, and you have in the statistics some weaknesses, I think also you can choose some drills with a score variations to solve those problems. I mean, it's part from my question. Okay, you agree with that?
What types of problems in the statistics are we trying to? Could you give me an example?
An example, like when we are doing a lot of, silly mistakes, like losing balls and doing some, silly mistakes. Or when we are losing a lot of service, when we are, spiking a lot out, not in the court, or when we are doing some mistakes in transition period, not in the normal play. I mean, when we are losing some losing some points in the critical or the difficult out of system balls. Sometimes some teams are losing some points when they have a good reception. It's between practice. Sometimes we have that like that. I think we can use the score to solve these problems. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely with that. I think it's up to the coach to find creative ways to figure that out. No question about it. I think in the simplest way, if and I think Sherif, you would agree with this, if we have teams losing a point when they shouldn't have because of a lack of focus or something like that, often we will find coaches who are deducting points, right? I mean, there's a penalty for that or something like that. I mean, it's in a very simple example. I think that's one way to do it. No question about it. I think creative scoring, Sherif, you're exactly right, is a critical part of beach volleyball training, and we can reward points for great performances. We could make something worth 2 points if we wanted, but we can also deduct points for behavior that we don't want to see repeated. And I think that's a great way for players who want to win and for who the score matters a lot. That's a great way. Manipulation of the score to promote the behavior we want to see is an excellent way to run practices. Sometimes I agree.
Because also I believe that the score is the heart of our game. Okay.
It is. I agree.
Okay. It is done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Donc pour la première partie, oui, c'est essentiel de marquer des points. Ça permet d'augmenter la pression, notamment par exemple. Donc pendant un entraînement, c'est très important de pouvoir enchaîner 3-4 fois la même répétition, marquer des services propres 3-4 fois d'affilée, justement pour pouvoir avoir cet impact sur la personne sur l'équipe qu'il y a en face. C'est aussi possible qu'un coach demande donc plusieurs fois des répétitions pendant l'entraînement pour mettre en situation qu'un service soit effectué plusieurs fois d'affilée et marquer plusieurs fois des points d'affilée. Monsieur Sherif demandait si c'était possible de justement utiliser ces données que nous récoltons pour pouvoir pallier un mauvais jeu. C'est-à-dire quand nous avons des joueurs qui font des erreurs, on va dire, de débutants, quand des athlètes de haut niveau font des erreurs de débutants, est-ce que nous pouvons utiliser ces méthodes comme moyen de pression pour justement faire en sorte de punir ou ne pas pousser les joueurs à refaire ces erreurs. Donc oui, c'est possible, oui, c'est efficace, oui, ça a marché, oui, ça a déjà été testé. Back to you.
Sherif, may I loved your question, and during the translation, I was writing down just for the audience some examples of exactly what you're talking about that we use all the time in practice. One thing we do is if the ball ever lands on the other side's court untouched, it's worth 2 points. So we use that a lot. It encourages the defenders to go and try to at least touch the ball, to make an attempt to play the ball. So if it lands untouched, it's a 2-point ball. Players could, if we serve the ball into the net, that could be 2 points to the opponent, as opposed to a service error that is at least over the net and out long. We think a serve that's over the net and out long is a better mistake. We think a serve into the net is really, really poor play. We want to avoid that. Sometimes we encourage an attack on 2, so the setter to attack that ball on the second contact. If we want to encourage that, sometimes we'll award 2 points to the offense if they score that, as opposed to 1, because we're trying to motivate them to do it more often. Sometimes we have a crosswind and we want the player who's on the bad side to get to the good side and run behind their setter and attack from the other side of the court. So we want to encourage them to do that. So we'll reward 2 points for a kill that comes from that zone. So just off the top of my head, those were some examples of the types of things, Sherif, that I think you were talking about.
I need also to add another one that I love. One of the drills that we put a number of the ball of each ball. I mean, if we have 20 balls, we will have like 3 balls, and we put 3, and then the 3 balls will be, each one will be 3 points. and another 3 balls, 2 points, and the remaining balls will be only 1 point. And when we need to make the feeling of players that this ball is very important, we send the big point, 3 balls, 3 points with the number 3 in the court. I think it will be very important and good drill.
Yeah, and very fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think now, Ghizlan, you can translate, and I think we reach the time now. We have only 3 minutes to go, and it's the floor for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Donc, grosso modo, ce qui a été dit, c'est que nous pouvons utiliser donc, ces méthodes de mesurer pour avoir un impact sur, sur les joueurs et faire en sorte que ça soit utilisé, donc, comme on a expliqué pendant ce webinaire et le webinaire précédent, que ça peut être utilisé pour motiver les athlètes. Là aussi, ça peut être utilisé pour les punir en quelque sorte. Par exemple, quand nous utilisons le fait d'avoir fait un service qui va aller directement dans le filet, on va faire perdre des points donc, à l'athlète pour lui signifier que c'était une erreur, qu'il ne fallait pas la refaire. Mais en revanche, donc, le même service qui passe de l'autre côté du terrain, mais qui sort en dehors des lignes et du coup fait perdre un point, va faire perdre moins de points. Donc, grosso modo, les coachs doivent et devraient utiliser donc, ces méthodes de collection de données, que ce soit, encore une fois, pour motiver les joueurs, pour leur montrer leurs lacunes, pour effectuer un entraînement intelligent et un entraînement qui va vraiment les aider à améliorer leur performance. Et ça peut très bien être utilisé justement pour, en quelque sorte, punir ou montrer aux athlètes que ce qui est fait n'est plus à refaire. Thank you.
Okay, Mohamed, I think we reached the time. I don't know, where is Alfred? Alfred disappeared.
It's not a big deal. It's not a problem. He's trying to reconnect.
Okay.
Just before closing this webinar, I also had maybe around 10 questions. So I will try to. No. We will have with Wayne a long discussion during this next days, and for sure that we will be back with more information to our coaches. So I'm so sorry for the remaining questions. Still maybe 10 or 15 questions from let's say 6 people. So maybe we'll try to post them to Wayne if he doesn't mind, and maybe we can get the answers. So we are so sorry about that because it's a limited time. I would like just to thank Wayne so much for his commitment and his engagement with us, and for sure that Wayne is an added value for us. Then I would like to thank everyone, every single person working with us, from the people who are taking care about Facebook, about the YouTube, about even the Zoom webinar, coaches, our coaches, and also National Federation people. Then also for sure that we will come with a very, very good surprise, maybe within a couple of weeks. We will come with a different way to see beach volleyball and especially coaching. Thank you so much, and I will give the floor to Wayne. Then after that to Sherif. Thanks, Wayne. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for all the coaches who gave us questions. I enjoyed the opportunity to have a discussion. Mohamed and Sherif and Alfred, and whether you were here this time or last time, as Baldo and Ahmed and Morad and Munir, thank you guys so much. I'm super grateful and honored to be able to have a conversation with you. And Jasleen, thank you so much. There's no way this happens without your wonderful translation skills. So thank you for doing that and providing everybody the opportunity to hear from each other regardless of what languages we speak in our countries. So thank you all. It was a pleasure and a privilege to be able to do this with y'all, and I certainly look forward to doing it again.
Okay, thank you very much, Wayne. I would like also to say to you that I am, and all coaches in Africa, very grateful, especially for your, very lovely way of presenting and giving information coming from you. And also, I would like to ask you in the future, yes, if you don't mind, we will arrange for another webinar, but not now. I mean, we buzzed you 2 times in 2 weeks, and I hope very soon we will arrange for another one, because I think people already gained a lot of information from you. And also, I would like to thank all the team working with us, and also the coaches. I will start from my daughter Gislan, and my big brother Mohamed, and Tarek also Adwar is with us now, and Osvaldo and Munir and Alfred, he's not here now, and Ata. All of them and all coaches are, following us on the Facebook or in the Zoom meeting. Thank you for all, and also I thank the greetings for the staff in CAVB, starting from Dr. Elwani, the president, and Waida, and all the board, and also all our colleagues there. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you very soon. And then we will not translate now. It's enough, okay? Thank you very much, guys. Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
صح.